Hello, this is Kyra. In this video, we are going to be talking about contracted group terms, the terminology and vocabulary when it comes to a contracted group quote or the contract itself. This is part of the groups training series. We're going over part 4 in this video. So let's start with group rate by room category, okay? So when you get a quote back from the vendor, whether it's a cruise, a resort, a hotel, they're going to list the price for all of the room categories at that property or on that cruise ship. And the pricing is usually going to be listed per person, okay? So when you see the pricing on your quote or on your contract, it usually is per person. And if it is a hotel or resort, it may be by number of nights that they are staying, because not everybody is going to stay the same number of nights, most likely. When you get this room category pricing, these rates, pay close attention to what is and what is not included in the pricing, because you can relay this to your clients. So very important that you know what is included and what is not included. So let's go over an example here. I have example of 2 room categories. This is an all-inclusive resort. So this is our example here. Let's look at the deluxe tropical view here at the top. You can see in this fine print here, shared round trip transfers are included. So when I see these prices here, they are including round trip transfers. So keep that in mind. That's a bonus for your clients, right? It's included in the price. Now, let's say you have one person who wants to go for 6 nights, okay? So how do you read this chart? Because it is very confusing. If you have one person, you're going to look at the single occupancy rate, okay? We have our single occupancy rate, double occupancy rate, triple occupancy rate, and our child rate at the far end there. So if you have one person for 6 nights, their total is going to be $1,325.31 for their stay. It's a single person, so we multiply this number by 1. That is going to be the cost for that single person to stay for 6 nights in the deluxe tropical view room, okay? Now, let's say you have 2 people staying for 4 nights, 2 adults specifically. So let's look at the double rate again. Let's go down to the 4 nights. So it's going to be $571.46 per person. So you're going to multiply that times 2 for those 2 people to stay 4 nights, okay? So that is how you read this chart. Let's go over one quick example. Now, you do want to clarify these types of things with the vendor when you receive your quote from them or when you receive the contract. But in this example here, if you had 1 adult and 1 child in the room, or let's say 2 adults and 1 child in the room, the 2 adults would be at this double rate if it was 4 nights, so 2 times that, plus the child rate for 4 nights is added on. So the child comes in at the child rate, but the occupancy is actually based on the number of adults, not the number of people. Okay, that was for this resort. It could be different for other resorts. That is a great question to ask with your contract. So then you can see the deluxe pool view room also has the shared round trip transfers included. And you can see it's cost just a little bit more per person here for this room because it is a slightly upgraded room, but you read the chart just the same. Just remember all of these prices are for one person, so you may need to multiply and add them together. Next up, let's talk about the payment schedule. So you're always going to have a deposit, you're always going to have a final payment, and you may have the intermediary payments as well. It depends on your group, it depends on your vendor, a lot of factors that go in there. So first off, you have the deposit. This is the amount that's due at time of signing the contract. So when you receive your quote, make sure that the group leader is ready to pay this deposit when you sign the contract, because that is what is expected, okay? This deposit could be per person, it could be per room, per cabin. It could vary based on the vendor, the group type, the number of people and rooms. There's a lot of factors that go into what the deposit might be. And we're going to look at an example here in just a second. Okay, so that is the deposit. It is due at time of contracting. Now, your middle payments, your intermediary payments, there could be a second deposit, a third deposit. There might even be a fourth deposit. These are additional deposits that are due between the deposit date at time of contracting and the final payment date. It's usually a small portion of the contract total. So it might be pay 10% of the contracted amount on this date, or pay 30% of the contracted amount by this date. It builds up towards the final payment. And the final payment is the amount due for 100% of the contracted rooms and cabins. So everything you have in your contract is due and paid in full 100% by this date. I strongly recommend that all travelers in the group are booked into their room or cabin and paid in full by this time. Because if everyone in the group is paid in full by this time, you have satisfied the 100% amount for the contract. So very important that you have your group members booked by this date and make sure they have paid in full so that you meet the final payment policies. So let's look at an example here, okay? This resort is an AMR resort. They have different policies and different payment schedules based on the number of rooms the group was holding in this example. So up here, we first have the small rooms. This is a group that's holding up to 25 rooms, okay? So at this resort, if the group was holding 20 rooms, they'd fall under the small size, and their initial deposit is $500, okay? So a flat amount. The final payment is due 65 days before first arrival. When they say first arrival, let's say that one of the group members is going from Saturday to Friday. They're coming in on Saturday, they're leaving the following Friday. Maybe the other group members are coming in on Monday and they're leaving on Friday. So you have one group member who's leaving a few days earlier. That means that 65-day timer is on that Saturday date, the first person who arrives. The earliest date that someone arrives at that hotel, that's going to be when the 65-day timer is going off of, not when most people are coming, when the first person arrives, okay? Now let's look at the medium group. This is a group with 26 to 50 rooms. Their deposit is $50 per person, okay? So if you are expecting, let's say 30 rooms with 2 people each, that's 60 people, it would be 50 per 60 person. So $50 per each of the 60 people. So 60 times 50 for that initial deposit, okay? That's how that would be calculated. Now this one has an intermediary payment. It has a second deposit, which is 30% of the group total, due 95 days before first arrival, okay? So same way we calculate the time period, but they want a little bit of the group covered, 30% covered before about 3 months prior to travel, okay? And that's certainly very doable. As people are booking into their rooms, paying their deposits, right? Our individual group members are going to have deposits and final payment dates as well, just like our individual reservations. But as people start paying their deposits, you are putting money towards that total group amount paid. So this 30% is very reasonable. If you have group members who are able to pay in full when they make their reservation, that's ideal for you. It's going to help you with these types of intermediary deposits. And then the final payment and names is also due 65 days prior for the medium group. And you can see here, this large group has a second and a third deposit. So depending on the group size, the payment schedule is slightly different, but this is a great example of what you might see when it comes to payment schedules. So let's talk about cancellation versus attrition and reduction, okay? This is something that can be very confusing, so let's go over it. Cancellation is when the entire group is not going. So if you see the word cancel in your contract or in your quote, it really does mean that the whole group's not going. No one is traveling. They are the policies regarding cancellation of the entire group. Now, that is maybe not so likely to happen. Hopefully your group plans to travel, but you are definitely going to be affected by the attrition and the reduction policies. And they are, they go interchangeable. You can hear attrition, you might hear reduce or reduction, but these policies are regarding the reduction of the number of rooms or the number of room nights. So this is when less rooms are needed than were held. That's just the basic example of it. So let's say you contracted 20 rooms, but you only need 18. That's part of the attrition and reduction policies. Now let's talk about the difference between a total room attrition and a room night attrition. So total room attrition is when a held group is reduced entirely from the group. That's you had 20 rooms in your contract, but you only need 18, so you reduce 2 rooms. That is an example of total room attrition. The entire room is not being used by a guest. Room night attrition is when nights on a held room are reduced. So for example, let's say you hold this room for the mom and dad, possibly for 7 nights. They decide to only go for 5 nights. So you are reducing 2 nights on that room. The whole room is still being used, but it's not being used for as many nights as you blocked it off for. So when you look at these attrition and reduction policies, they are a great benefit to you as a group, okay? It is a huge benefit to the group because this means you can block additional rooms than you think you're going to need, and you can reduce them, right? You have these policies. Now, of course, make sure you read what the policies are in your contract. I've seen very favorable attrition and reduction policies before, and I've also seen ones that are maybe not quite as favorable. So let's look here at an example. Let's look at a cancellation schedule. Again, cancellation is when the entire group is not going. So at this resort, this is an all-inclusive resort as well, 101 days prior to departure, there is no penalty. Okay, so we're talking 3.5 months in advance. If they decide they're not going on their family reunion, there is no penalty to cancel that group. That is very favorable. I think that's a very generous policy because that resort is holding those rooms for you and they're willing to go with no penalty. Okay. Now you can see here in the next time frame, 100 to 71 days prior to departure, that initial deposit is non-refundable. So then you want to look and see, well, what is the initial deposit? Okay. And then you'll really get an idea of how much of a penalty this truly is. 70 to 56 days prior to departure, it is a 1-night penalty per room based on category and occupancy. Okay, so it's a 1-night penalty. So if all the rooms were booked for 5 nights, you're penalized for 1 night for each of those rooms. That added up together is going to be the penalty for canceling in that time period. So you can see here we have another one, 55 to 41 days. Let's look at this 40 to 0 days prior departure. So if you are canceling this group at this resort 40 days in advance, you hit the 100% penalty on the entire contract. But if you're 41 days in advance, you're still going to get some of your money back. That is absolutely amazing to me because that's not really very far in advance that the hotel's holding on to this. You're still going to be penalized, but you're not going to lose everything until you hit the 40 days, at which point they expect 100% payment on the group, even if no one is traveling. Here is a very simple example of an attrition or a reduction schedule. So look at this. Here we have 65 days prior to departure, no penalty, okay? So that means at this resort, it's the same one we were just looking at for cancellation. This means if you blocked 50 rooms, and you only need 40 rooms, and it is over 65 days in advance, you have no penalty to remove those rooms. So you can contract extra rooms that you think you might need, and you can remove them over 65 days in advance at no penalty. That is very good policy, okay? That means that you as the travel agent can block extra room categories, extra rooms. You don't ultimately know for certain what room everyone is going to block or want to stay in, but it will help you out a lot with that. Okay, so you can block more rooms than you need, more room nights that you need, and you're going to want to pay attention and put this date on your calendar so that when it comes around, you can make sure that you reduce those rooms and room nights that you don't need. Now, once you get into the 64 to 0 day time period, you can see it actually varies depending on the time of year that they're traveling. In this example, they are 100% non-refundable. So this one doesn't really have stages in the middle. It's either no penalty or full penalty, but really just over 2 months in advance, you really should know who's coming and who's not coming and what rooms you need and what rooms you don't need. Let's look at one more example of cancellation and attrition. This is the AMR all-inclusive resort we were looking at a little earlier. So different resort from our previous example. but this one is a little different here. You can see 66 plus days prior to departure, no penalty for canceled room nights. That's where our room nights versus rooms comes into play, okay? And room nights may be added at the same rates as the original block. This is another very favorable policy. This means if you underblocked rooms, you didn't block enough rooms, they will add room nights at the original rate that you contracted, assuming there's availability. Please keep that in mind. Availability is not promised unless it's been held in the contract at contracting time. So it's not guaranteed there's availability, but if you need to add some nights, add some rooms, you can do that at the original rate. Really great policy there. Now, 65 to 36 days prior to departure, they said up to 20% of the existing room block nights. Again, this is nights. This is not rooms may be canceled without penalty. And there is a penalty there of 30% for anything outside of that 20% room nights. So one thing to note when you are contracting a group, I recommend that you cover all your room categories, and we're going to talk about this a little bit more in part 5, but you contract all the room categories you think someone will stay, but it's more favorable for you to do 5 nights and very few rooms at 7 nights, because most people are going to travel for closer to 4 to 5 nights, most likely with groups. That's just the general time people are traveling. Because when you have a policy like this that says room block nights, those nights are going to add up. So if you have all the rooms blocked for 7 nights and you have 10 rooms that only want 5 nights, that's an additional 20 nights. You have 10 rooms not using 2 nights. That's 20 room nights that you've got to reduce. And that's when a policy like this comes into play. So it's great to have these types of policies, but the policy that you have may dictate how you contract and block off your rooms. Okay. And they said up to 20% may be added at the original rate of the original block. And then 35 days to 0 days prior to departure is a full penalty for any cancellations or reductions. Okay, this is just another example. Again, cancellation is the whole group's not going. Attrition and reduction is we don't need all of the rooms that we blocked or all of the room nights that we blocked. This is the fun stuff. We have our comps, concessions, amenities. It gets used interchangeably. You can see all of these words in a contract. They all basically mean the same thing. Comps does stand for complimentary, but these are the free stuff. This is the extras, the promotions offered to the group at no cost. Some examples are free rooms, upgraded rooms, group cocktail parties, and more. The sky is the limit. Different resorts, different cruise lines are going to offer different comps, but this is the great stuff that you can really use to benefit your group. So some examples here, and again, these are just examples. You could see anything here, but let's start with the first one. 1 free room per 10 paid in standard room categories. 11th room is free. So at this resort, if you had 11 rooms that you sold, one of those would be free. Now there's some fine print here on how that works, max of 3 free rooms, but 11th room free, that means that's a great deal. It can be used by you, the travel agent, if you want to travel with the group to help them out. This is something you can use to help yourself go. This is also something that can help someone go who maybe can't afford to go. Now we have complimentary upgrade to the next category for every 10 standard rooms. So if you have 10 rooms booked, you're going to get 1 complimentary upgrade to the next room category for one of those rooms. This is subject to availability, okay? I highly recommend you do not inform the group that you have this policy. If you were to have something like this in your group contract or quote, I would not tell them because it's subject to availability. So I would much rather, let's just say John goes and he's traveling with his wife. He's going with the group. He could only afford the standard room, but I called in and I said, I'd like to use the complimentary upgrade for John. John arrives at the resort and they say, you've been upgraded to the next room category by your travel agent. John is going to be very happy. It's a surprise for him. And of course, it's subject to availability. So I can't promise him that he's going to get the room upgrade, but if he shows up and he gets it, it's a benefit to him. Now, on the flip side, if I were to inform John that I put in a complimentary upgrade, but it's subject to availability, he may be disappointed if he shows up at the resort and they don't have availability to upgrade him. So I usually keep this hidden from my group leaders and from the group in general, and use it as a bonus at the end, depending on how many rooms we have, so that it can be a surprise if it does go through. Now, also one complimentary upgrade for VIP or group leader to privilege. This is their club level for every 15 standard rooms. So they do have this complimentary upgrade to club level for the group leaders, depending on how many rooms are booked. So those are just some of the room kind of comps that you may see. What about this added value for all groups? So these are some things that are available to everyone. A welcome drink during check-in. Okay, the group leader is going to get a VIP amenity, which is a fruit plate and a bottle of wine. That's nice for the group leader. 15% spa discount for everyone booked into the group. Okay, anybody who wants to go to the spa is going to get this discount. That's a great bonus for them. They're offering a semi-private dinner for up to 20 people and check-in for the group if they arrive at the same time. Okay, now this is the last one, check-in for the group. Probably isn't going to happen unless they're all traveling from the same place on the same plane at the same time. Then they might get to take advantage of this. But in my experience, most groups don't get to take advantage of this just because they're all coming in on different days and different times. So that's just an example of the wide range of comps you may see. So some other things to note, make sure you read and understand the terms and conditions on your quote and on your contract. It's so important that you understand these in full. We're going to be talking about this in the next part, in the next video, but you as the travel agent are signing the contract. The group leader is not the one who signs the contract with the vendor. You sign the contract with the vendor. So you need to make sure you understand what you are getting ready to sign, okay? Now pay attention to what is and what is not included, because these are things you can use to help sell the group, right? If the transfers are included, that's a bonus for that group. But also be in mind, maybe the taxes are not included. Maybe the price that you see is going to be a little lower than the total price. So make sure you pay attention to those things when you get your quote and when you get your contract. So thank you so much. We covered a lot of vocabulary here in this video, as well as some examples. And I will see you in part 5, where we're going to talk about actually getting the contract for your group.